thank you for the three of you for sharing your experiences and your challenges. So for Tara, I was really inspired by the work that you did with witnesses because I had worked with the first Truth and Reconciliation Commission event in Winnipeg in 2010. So it was really amazing to see how it came and how it was presented in Vancouver. And particularly because I'm thinking 7 people on a curatorial committee must have been really challenging. But you've said also that it was really important for you in terms of being the mentee in that situation. My question and sort of consideration was did you gain experience in thinking about curating and presenting traumatic information and in thinking about perhaps the preventative actions for triggers? Because I felt for me in that context it was really difficult to think about or anticipate how someone might react to an exhibition, and thinking about ways that there could be ways to deal with that trauma and those feelings that come out, and how do you sort of close it?
I think this was a challenge that we dealt with throughout the exhibition in many different forms, because the Indian Residential School Survivor Society, was especially important for this aspect in the exhibition, but they were only available to us during our programmed events and during regular open hours, or when staff were touring groups through the exhibition. There weren't necessarily health workers there, but I think that we spent so much time in the planning process leading up to the opening talking about how to approach a survivor respectfully, and working with some of the artists in that regard was a bit challenging for Gina and for Jamasi. They're both, you can only reach them by phone, and contact with them had to happen at very specific times, and Jamasi talked about the sexual abuse that he experienced in residential school, like basically for the first time in public during his artist talk, and it was a really heavy event. But all of the other artists that were there, and he came and spoke with Tanya Willard because she had curated his work the year before, so they had a relationship together already. So there was like all of this is just kind of to say that although we did consider it a lot, it was something that also happened sort of organically through the process, and it was just all of the artists that we showed and the staff members that were involved created this big network of support for one another. And when Jamasi was giving his artist talk, I think it was Skeena that spoke up and said, you don't have to talk about this if you don't want to. So there was someone that was willing to step in for him, but in the end, it was still his choice to share that. I don't know if that really addresses your question.
Oh, for sure. I really enjoyed that you involved the community involvement, and you had mentioned healthcare workers on site and elders. Mm-hmm. I also really found it amazing too that at the TRC for this, that you included perspectives from non-Indigenous and Indigenous artists alike, to have that sort of full perspective, but also being able to really commemorate and honor the survivors, and not having a burden just on Indigenous peoples to think about those issues of healing and reconciliation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our the only sort of thing that we wanted all of the artists in the exhibition to have was, that most of them had some sort of sustained practice around this topic. So our two non-Indigenous artists were Kathy Busby and Sandra Semchuk, and they've both done so much work around that topic. Sandra's partner went to residential school. And so they felt like the right people to bridge that conversation. And I think having Kathy's work out in the library space helped students to engage with it on their kind of day-to-day movement through the university. And that's, you know, that's sort of an extension of my thinking around Joan's work as having kind of a mentorship role. Kathy's work really took that on, especially with people being able to take pieces of the work with them when they left. I think that was really meaningful for people.
One more question I had around that exhibition was whether there were cultural protocols or curatorial protocols that you might have followed in terms of exhibiting trauma, and whether or not you think that should be something that needs to be developed.
Yeah, I think it is, because I think for institutions that aren't necessarily run by Indigenous people but are working with Indigenous artists a lot, they might not know how to approach trauma. And for us, working with the Residential School Survivor Society, as well as Chief Robert Joseph, was really helpful in that way. And again, there are things that like developed more organically through building relationships with artists, and I think that in itself is kind of a protocol. But we also, around, like before the exhibition, we had a ceremony that wasn't open to the public. We had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Reconciliation Canada did a healing circle, which is like a full day event that's also not open to the public. So we tried to address that issue on a number of levels, I would say. And it did, it was definitely a learning curve for me the first time that I spoke to Jamasi on the phone. I had to ask him for an artist statement, and that's when he told me about his sexual abuse. And that was a really intense emotional experience for both of us. And I don't think that I was, quite prepared for that, but in the end, it was okay because we kept developing our relationship. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of hard to say how to put down protocol for something that is so intensely emotional and so different for people, I think.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. It sort of makes me think about this self-care that needs to happen in terms of dealing with these issues and exhibiting, curating really traumatic knowledge and experiences. And Sherry, you had shared with us some really personal moments that you had gone through, and your mentors really helped you through that. So in terms of thinking about like best practices with a mentorship, within a mentorship infrastructure or relationship, it's that interpersonal relationship that you build with a mentor. And I really enjoyed what you said about the transmission of knowledge that between the mentor and the mentee, and that it's evolving. And that maybe perhaps the best practice in thinking about mentorship responsibilities and roles is having the mentee and mentor choose each other. Because also, Jennifer, you were talking about the fact that you're on this trail together, and it needs to be cohesive, and because otherwise you're forcing two people together that might not either be a healthy relationship or working. So I really enjoyed what you had to say about that, both of you. Also, you mentioned the peer-to-peer talking. Was that set up in terms of the BAMF, or was that just what you did on your own time to talk with other mentees that were going through some of the similar other problems or situations?
It's sort of, I guess, an aspect of being in the program together. Like, there's a really transient sort of population in Banff, and when you're in the practicum program, you sort of know that there's this timeline for how long you're there. And when I first arrived, I was sort of surprised by how welcoming everybody was, and then as the time that I spent there went on, and within a few months, many of the people I'd become familiar with were finishing their programs and leaving. It was really important to me as new people came to be really open and receptive to them. And so there's that aspect of it where you definitely like kind of understand the situation you're in a program and a place where people are always coming and going. But then it's also just like very much kind of building personal connections. There isn't a facilitated mode of mentoring between the people who are in the program. But I think that especially when you're working somewhere with Indigenous programming and you want to be very adamant in taking advantage of the opportunities to connect with people and learn everything that you can, those are relationships that you pursue.
You had mentioned sort of decolonizing practices in terms of being there in the planning development of that. And I know, Jennifer, you had said you had a critique about how some mentorship programs are developed in terms of applying and then getting paired up with a mentor that you weren't necessarily prepared maybe to work with. So do you think that it's important to be able to create that mentorship from the start of it, from the beginning, or does that complicate how it might happen?
There's a couple of different ways that you could approach it. The idea that if you have a group of people who are interested in learning from a mentor, maybe have a group of mentees and a group of mentors and do a mixer and see who naturally gravitates to one another. Sometimes that will work, sometimes it won't work, because that depends on how the mentee is, how confident they are enough to actually engage with the mentor. I've seen some artists that I've worked with where they're like masters, and you just love their work and you're just amazed by their skill level, and I'm looking for someone to train, and really, how about this person, how about that person, and they're like, no, they just decide that they don't want to invite that person that you're bringing to them, and they're hunting for someone. So it's a challenge.
Well, I'm not going to hog them any longer for our conversations here, so I'm going to open it up to the floor.
The lady who presented the residential school project, with the death of the artist over those years, when she first presented that piece at the Woodland Cultural Center, that was a center, that was a former residential school, and so there were things that would happen, and she would always animate that installation. Without her, I felt that installation worked with only her, but that's the only way I've ever seen it. I was quite surprised to see it come up on the screen without the who animated that, the installation?
Her son.
Her son? Oh,
Yeah, so we
okay.
worked with her son and her husband to bring the piece. They had parts of it at their house in Calgary, and they're both doing a lot of work with the gallery in Calgary that represented Joan to properly catalog and record the work that she did. And so he actually did a performance at the opening night, and it didn't go very well. He was very nervous, and I think that people felt uncomfortable being asked to be in that position, and I think that Joan just had a way of doing it that made people feel really comfortable, and we were excited about having the family there, but they just weren't. I don't want to speak ill of him at all, because I think that it was wonderful that they came and participated. But I mean, this is, I think, kind of, I was the one that initiated that, so this is something that's was kind of a lesson for me as a mentee in the process, was thinking that this was so great and that it would go well, and then maybe not facilitating it as much as it needed to be facilitated. And then it just ended, I mean, it was what it was in the end. The performers filed in and nobody wanted to talk. So that in itself is, you know, it was a powerful moment in its own right. But so it was activated by her son, but then it was meant to be more included as a record of this very important early piece on the residential school history.
I was just to speak to that experience, because I was there at the opening for the activation of that piece, and I also think that within the room itself there was a lot of emotions, a weighted experience of being in the room at the opening. All of the artworks that were assembled in that exhibition had a lot of energy, which was very real, right? And one of the first things that I've ever been inspired by is Joan Cardinal Schubert's work. And this piece that was there, well, it was just emotional for me to be in the room with it, and let alone have it be activated by her son, because I've only ever seen a video documentation of it from Surrey Art Gallery. So it was quite a full experience. But that wasn't my question. So what I'm interested in is how, you know, because we come to these things and we talk about our experience, and we talk about the structures that support mentorship, and we talk about the problems or the things that don't support mentorship. But I'm also interested in how all of you are coming in connection to community in some regards, right? And with a purpose, right? And through mentorship, you are also able to see the places that community comes together, hopefully. And I wonder, like, you know, can you reflect on your beginning moment and how the mentorship helped you see community differently, or the communities that you're purposefully interacting with?
I think probably everybody has their own way to speak to that, but one of the things that I thought was interesting in relation to your question, and maybe also in relation to what was said about finding a mentor that suits you, or having mentors that are like, no, not this person, is I think that I had a really incredible benefit of having a friend encourage me to go to the Banff Center specifically to work with somebody that they thought that I would connect with really well, and already sort of just being in that position and being told, you know, here is this person, you should connect with them, I think that you guys will be very much on the same page, is a part of that kind of greater net of community. And that, I think that also fits with what I was saying about, you know, like trying to connect with other people who are in the program seeking a similar outcome from myself, is you sometimes have to be active about it, but you have to make your own experience, and that's, I mean, community helps make that experience for you, and so it's so important to be receptive and giving of yourself, but also welcoming of what other people will give, and to be willing to speak, but also willing to listen, and I think that that creates a net for you that helps to build that.
Sherry, you mentioned that work overload took away from other mentorship opportunities, which is just classic mentorship experiences. And as someone who mentors young people, can you share what that meant exactly? When I was mentored, the work overload was the mentorship in a way. So I'm wondering what sort of scenarios existed for you that caused challenges? Merci.
Yeah, sure. I've had a really great experience where the workload that I began my position with has expanded to really suit kind of my own interests and niches that I fit well within, and I've been included on projects outside of the visual arts department at the Banff Centre as well, where I'm currently helping to organize a large arts and technology conference that's happening in late November. I've been asked to blog for that, which relates to a Canada Council grant that the Banff Centre is getting. I'm frequently asked to write like bios and things for the website. Kind of the way that I'm interested in community and the accessibility of information, and the way that I also work as a writer has really added, I guess, to the workload that is already a part of my position, where I'm still trying to make sure that I'm fulfilling all of these tasks that I do to help support artist residencies and to help artists while they're there at the Banff Centre. And I think that it's something that myself and my mentors are in the process of trying to figure out how to manage, because I'm very grateful to be given these opportunities. To blog for the Canada Council is amazing. To be able to help organize this summit is wonderful. And to be able to work with artists so frequently and so closely is really meaningful to me. But there are only so many hours in a day, and that begins to mean that certain mentoring projects that we had sort of started earlier on in my program, where I was keeping like an ongoing annotated bibliography of the research that I was doing and the articles I was reading, and we were taking time to discuss these things. There no longer really is that time, and that's a challenge that I think everybody is trying to figure out how to balance, because there's a lot for me that's coming from these professional experiences, but there's also a lot on the end of my own research that it is hard to kind of maintain a connection to as I become so busy. And I think it also may be a bit of a side effect of having 3 mentors.
And once again, thank you very much for our panelists and everyone that asked some questions and came out today. Thank you.